Welcome to the Digital Marketing Mentor. I'm your host, Danny Gavin, and together with industry leaders and marketing experts, we'll explore the meeting point of mentorship and marketing. We'll discover how these connections have affected careers, marketing strategies, and lives. Now get ready to get human. Today is a very special office hours episode with Maddie Deane, who is the SEO Team Lead at Optidge. Maddie's worked on numerous campaigns with Optidge focusing on SEO, social media, user experience, and much more. She's driven by a passion for knowledge and helping others excel. She's also been recognized by the University of Houston for a commitment to volunteering and social branding, following a special project that she worked on with the Holocaust Museum of Houston. And I happened to work with Maddie on that before she came to Optidge. So today we are going to be chatting about being a woman and being young in the workplace. So Maddie, I've been waiting a long time for you to join the podcast. It's really exciting that you're finally on.
Yes, I'm very excited too. And I think this is the perfect topic. So I'm very excited to finally talk about it.
Me too as well. So you're technically Gen Z. We've heard a lot of things about millennials and Gen Z in the workplace. Much of it is not very flattering. How have you been received as a young person when you were entering the workforce? Have you had to fight, counter, defend against any of those negative stereotypes?
That's an excellent question. And I think it's actually really funny because I never considered myself a Gen Z because I'm kind of like on the cusp. But either way, millennial, Gen Z, I definitely know there's a lot of like stereotypes out there, and I've had to counter some of them. I think the main one just being like not taken too seriously, had to kind of fight harder for respect because it's assumed that Gen Z doesn't really take their job seriously. I think is kind of the overall trend that I've seen. I've had to like fight extra hard to counter that and like get some more respect for being in the same position as other people and having the same experience, but maybe being younger. I think that's definitely been a little bit of a struggle, but I don't think there's anything ultimately wrong with being Gen Z. Honestly, a lot of the negatives that some people say, I actually view as positives. I guess it depends who you ask. I think Gen Z a lot of times is seen as lazy, quote unquote. But in my view, the people I'm around and the people that I see on like social media or LinkedIn or whatever, they're not lazy. They just have a better understanding of boundaries with work. I think every generation has gone down a little bit in terms of like working 80 hours a week, and that's like the minimum, right? And then kind of having a better understanding of work-life balance and having a life outside of work. And I think Gen Z is definitely like the peak of that right now, where they work, what they get paid for, and they know what they're worth. And sometimes they cross a couple lines that can definitely be radical about it, but it can also be a really positive thing.
You obviously mentioned that you've had to deal with this in the workplace. So I want to clarify, is that within your business of Optidge, or is this with people and clients and things like that?
It's mostly been in some of my previous jobs, but with Optidge, it's mostly been with clients, not with like coworkers and stuff. I think my experience with Optidge as an employee has been great in that sense. I think it's mostly been like we deal with so many different clients, and they don't always know my background or who I am. Maybe they're just meeting me for the first time, or they have their own biases coming into this call that we're having. So I think that's been something where I guess I've experienced a lot more in that sense because we are in an agency versus if I were at one company, I'd have more time to like build rapport and kind of build myself up, where sometimes I'm only talking to this person once or twice, and that's the only interaction I get as an agency. So it definitely is a little bit different than what some people might experience.
Right, because in some ways, being in an agency, you're like talking to a lot more people, but it's like that interaction, that relationship is the quality is a lot less because you don't speak to them as often.
Exactly.
So kind of it breeds itself more of like potentially creating the situations where you're on one-on-one, people don't really know who you are, and therefore they come to maybe judgment or bias, out of nowhere.
And I think they're, in their defense, I think they are almost like forced to make their judgments a lot quicker because they know I'm only going to talk to you for X amount of time and then I have to make a decision or ask my questions. And they don't really get the benefit of like, let me get to know you for an hour, anything. They have their own goals and their own business to worry about. So I get it on one hand, but there's definitely underlying biases that I've come across for sure.
And we'll go through those in a little bit. So you originally entered the workforce in the field of psychology. I believe your degree is in psychology, and you've now transitioned to the world of marketing. So I always say that psychology and marketing are basically cousins. So it's not a big jump from one to the next. But as a young woman in particular, did you notice any differences in the way of gender specific treatment in the different
Mhm.
industries, previous jobs, compared to now?
I think they are very, like, they definitely are related, but it's hard to compare exactly because in psychology, I was only ever really in like the field as a student. I had internships. I did a lot of like research things because that's the direction I was going. And I graduated during COVID, which is when I kind of made that transition. But I definitely noticed there was a lot more women in positions of leadership in psychology. Most of my professors were women. Honestly, most of my classmates were women. So I'd never really had any of that, like people questioning me or any of those like subtle kind of biases I never really noticed. And when I got to my master's program for marketing, I started to notice that a little more just in different classes and people asking questions. Like you said, we'll get in some of those examples, but I think there's definitely a little more of an imbalance in marketing or just in business in general, not specifically marketing, but the entire business world, maybe a little more unbalanced.
I was recently in a final project meeting at the University of Houston. And, we always ask for constructive feedback or criticism. And this is people usually take their MS marketing degrees, which you took as well. In
Mhm.
that final project, we asked them, how can the program be better? What can we do? And she actually mentioned this and it was the first time I ever heard it. But it's like, I want more women professors. I want more guest speakers who are women because, I'm a professional woman and yes, you've got some great men professors, but it would be nice to have more role models to look up to and people to emulate. And that came to me as like a huge shock. Cause like in my mind, it's always like because of like the environment that I've built, it's, that it's very favorable to women. But, you know, um, and so it came as a shock, but I was like, yeah, good point. We're
Yeah,
missing those women leaders within the classrooms. So I can relate to that now better as my eyes have been open to it. Did you feel that way as well, Maddie, going through the master's program?
I did. And I remember one of my only women professors being for a class that was about women in entrepreneurship, which was a very cool class. But it was kind of like, of course, a woman's going to teach it because it's about being a woman. But I didn't really see a lot of women who were just like in the same space as, a male professor or something like that, like teaching the same kind of like general subjects or something more complex. There's definitely less, but there's some, which is definitely like better than zero. And I do agree, Optidge is definitely a special place, I think, because we do have more women. I've done interviews before and had people kind of comment on like, wow, like everyone I've interviewed with has been a woman, like that they were kind of shocked by that in a good way. But I think that makes it kind of a better place for that. But it was definitely unique for them to see that.
And that's why I think a shout out to Betsy Gelb, who was a professor at the University of Houston for many years. I don't know, 40, 50 years. She
Yeah,
recently retired, but man, she was a powerhouse of a woman and an amazing professor. She was actually my professor as well when I did the MBA. So I was sad to see her go, obviously, just because of everything in general, but I think also she was a great woman leader within the marketing department specifically at Bauer.
totally
But
agree.
yeah, hopefully, these sort of messages get through to, the head of the department, head of the university, and
Mhm.
hopefully the women of Optidge will also move to different like professorship
Yeah,
roles because you all have, most of you have master's degrees
true.
and there's lots of opportunities from that perspective. An interesting insight and topic there. I think let's get down into the nitty gritty.
Mm,
Can we go through some examples of a time or times recently when you've been ignored, overlooked, or had your expertise questioned in
yeah.
favor of an opinion from someone visibly older than you or a man?
Yes, I think I will say I know that there are people who have had a lot worse experiences. Most of my stuff has been very like small, subtle things. I've never had someone be like, "I am saying this because you're a woman." It's a lot of kind of just the tone or the way they say it, but it's a lot of just like small things. So I've had people ask me when the call starts, they're like, "What college are you going to? Are you doing an internship?" And I have to be like, "I actually have a master's degree. Like, this is my full time job," and kind of like assert. And they mean it in such a conversational way, but it's just like the assumption that's kind of, can be a little condescending. Same with like asking to talk to my boss. And that's a very interesting one because some of our clients know who you are and some of them don't. So I've had people who don't know who you are that just assume my boss is a man and they want your opinion, which happens to be true, but like they don't know that. Or maybe they do know you and I kind of say like, oh, hey, like I've already kind of talked to Danny on this. He agrees with me. And they're like, I still want to know his opinion. Like they don't really, they want to hear it from somebody else's mouth, I guess. It is a little hard to distinguish whether it's an age thing or a woman thing, because for me, it happens to be both. They're not saying, I want to hear it because you're young. I want to hear it because you're a woman. It's kind of just an assumption. But I do know, talking to other female coworkers, they've experienced the same thing. And most of them are older than me by a couple years. So I think it's usually the gender thing. But again, I can't really, not in these people's heads. I'm not sure exactly what they're thinking. But I think that has come up for some of the female coworkers as well.
When that happens, do you actively think of it as, oh my gosh, they're doing this because they're judging me? Or is it like later you think about it as like, oh, maybe it's that? Or like in the moment, is it like, are you actually getting offended in the moment?
I think it depends. There's been a couple of times where I'm not usually offended in the moment because I don't usually take things like in an aggressive way. I'm just not that way. But I'm usually just like, that was kind of weird. And then afterwards, I think, why was that weird? And then I'm like, oh, it was probably this. I think there's even been a time where I didn't even think about it because some of them are like more small. And I'm just like, okay, it happens. I'm not offended. And I think you've mentioned it and then like, they might be thinking this, I think they wanted to have like a meeting with you instead of just me. And you were like, is this because of the whole, because we had been having this discussion and I hadn't even thought of it at the time. So I'm sure there's times maybe there have been biases that I just overlook because it's not going to, at the end of the day, I'm still doing my job. It's not going to change anything, but it's usually after the fact. There's never been anything super blatant where I've had to be like, that's not okay. I like to think if it did happen, I would say something. But luckily it hasn't been like super offensive or anything like that.
Feeling that way, whether it's immediately or after the fact, you can't take that away from anyone. But is it possible that, meaning I don't want to, it's hard, right? Because sometimes it could be women, sometimes it could be young. We don't know what it is. But do you think in general agencies have a challenge that like the guy who sells, the client is, let's say, the owner or the boss. And then now the people who are doing the work aren't necessary. It's not exactly that person, but it's other people. And maybe the reason that they signed with the company in the first place was because of that individual. And therefore, when things come up, they're like, oh, I want to speak to that person. So do you think it's potentially, once again, I'm not trying to take away the feeling, but I want to like kind of move it a little bit. But do you think that could potentially be the issue as well? Is like people coming in, gaining trust from one person, and then now they're actually getting to work with another person. So whether that other person's younger, different gender, they could be the same age, right? It could be like my twin brother, right? Technically. So do you think that's a possibility?
Oh, definitely. I think there's definitely, we've noticed it sometimes not even related to like gender or anything, but just like if you say something in the proposal period that doesn't somehow get passed along to the deliverables and it doesn't get delivered, then there's an issue. So like, if those two stages aren't really connected in an agency, then there can be issues from all kinds of ways. But I think part of it is also like setting the expectation. Like, I don't necessarily know what these calls that you have proposals go like, but I do, obviously people are sold on what you're telling them and they're sold on like you talking to them and stuff. So if they don't have the expectation that once we start, it's going to be with someone else or it's going to be with two someones, however they're kind of envisioning it one way, and then their expectations aren't met. So I think that could definitely play a factor, whether or not age or anything is related.
So that's a great bit of advice that in the actual sales process, we need to do our job to set up expectations. And part of that is who are they going to be working with? And together with that, you can mention, like I'm saying, me or anyone can mention the type of people that they're going to work with. They might be younger, they might be a different gender. And you know what? That's totally fine. And so just like we set expectations of like, these are the deliverables that you're going to get. I think adding in that concept of who you're going to be working with and setting that expectation, that might make it easier later down the line. Like I'm not saying it's a solution, but it can't hurt to help add that within the sales process at the beginning as well.
Definitely. It's kind of like with SEO when you have like a link from the home page to another page and it like gives that page authority. I think you saying you're going to be working with Maddie or you're going to be working with Rachel and like they are blank, here's, just like a quick blurb, then I think it kind of passes that trust onto that person. Because on the flip side, we've had clients where they trust me like undoubtedly. Like I go into it thinking, okay, I'm going to have to explain myself here. I'm fully prepared to like give a full presentation. And they're like, cool, I trust your opinion. You're the expert, whatever you think. And I've been like shocked by that sometimes, because it doesn't happen every time. But I think those are cases where the client trusts us as an agency. Like that's a big thing we've talked about, like just in general and finding our ideal client. But I think that's the ideal, right? Is they trust our expertise as a whole team, no matter who is the individual working on it. I think that is the ideal situation.
And it makes me think, like, obviously being the CEO of the company, I've tried to pull myself out of meetings because we have lots of meetings and so on and so forth. But I'm thinking that maybe it makes sense to put myself back into the like kickoff meeting. Because if in that kickoff meeting, I can do a better job of cementing who the team is, cementing who are the experts, that actually might help later down the line. So something to think about. Sometimes as you think about you're removing yourself from meetings because you need more time. And the reason why you're not there is because you know the team is so great. It's like, the team is so great, they don't need me to be on that call.
No worries.
But on the other hand, there might be an aspect of, by Danny being there, and kind of like, for those who aren't familiar with kosher, it's right. Like, so you go to the supermarket and you look at, a chocolate bar is like, can I eat it? Well, you got to look for that kosher symbol. So it's kind of like Danny giving that kosher symbol on the kickoff
approval
call, where it's like, it's totally fine. I have an amazing team. And part of the reason that we're successful is because of that team. Or if anything, it's more of the team, right?
Yeah.
Than me personally. So yeah, that's cool. That's a good takeaway from, our chat right now. But, maybe getting into some of those meetings, especially ones where, where we may even think that it's like that stereotypical person who may come to judgment a lot easier, no matter what it is, age, gender, or, any other sort of biases that they may have. And sometimes it's not necessarily on purpose or evil, but maybe it could be the way that they've grown up and the society that they're coming from.
Yeah. I think it's almost always unintentional. It's a biases that they don't even know about it really, which I totally get. Like, we're all raised completely differently, like the differences between Gen Z, millennial, all that stuff. But I think that's why doing stuff like this is important, because once you hear about it, you're like, oh, you start to notice it in other places, and start to pick up on it. My favorite example of that is my little brother was raised partially by me and my sister. So he is very aware of women's issues, and he'll always bring them up. And it cracks me up because he's like a 6'4" guy, and he's like, I'm very aware of like his presence on a street. And he's like, I don't want this woman to like be afraid of me, or like unintentionally, or like the way he says things. He's so aware of those things because he's heard me and my sister and everything we've experienced in all areas of life, obviously. But it's just my favorite thing to like see him mentioning those. I'm like, oh, you're being educated. We always call him an ally.
I love it. And I think that brother went to the Taylor Swift concert with you, right?
Yes, he did. Yeah.
He's awesome.
Yes, he's good. And he's going to law school now. So, maybe he'll be a true ally for women in law school.
So Maddie, do you have any tips or strategies for cementing yourself as the expert in the room on your topic?
I definitely have tips. I'm not going to say that I use them all the time. Like, this is something I'm still learning and, trying to get better on. I think a lot of it comes down to your self-confidence and how you're portraying yourself. I think women are naturally not as self-confident or as like assertive, just in the way we're raised, but men usually are. So I think kind of channeling that a little bit and using that when you're giving advice, giving opinions, just talking in general and being more confident, using more assertive language. A lot of times I naturally will use things like I think, or like maybe like kind of a softer pitch, but that doesn't usually go over well. Partially because of our industry and because they're wanting an expert, right? Like they want, and it may be that I fully believe this opinion, but I naturally just want to put in these like softer words to not offend anyone, but that's not what they need. And that's not going to help them listen to me. So being more confident, kind of using proper language. It also really helps to predict questions. I think sometimes there's less, if this person does have biases, they're kind of looking for you to like not know something, or look for they subconsciously might be looking for an opportunity. So if you are more prepared and you predict what they might ask in advance, it helps you helps you feel more confident, but it also just helps you appear better and not give any opportunity for that. I mean, not that it's on you to not give an opportunity, but I think it can help for sure.
And I think portraying confidence, whether it's, someone who is young or a different gender, is really important. And the reason is, I don't think if I've ever told you this story, but I was hired for a consulting gig with a really big e-commerce company. And when I came in, there were a lot of different stakeholders. Based on previous sort of scenarios, I've been very careful that when I come into an organization with lots of stakeholders, I don't want to step on anyone's toes, right? I never want to actually go and put someone in their place. I don't want to offend anyone. I want to come in and try to do a good job of being a peacekeeper, but also bring my opinion. And at the end of the consulting gig, I had the opportunity to potentially become a more full-time consultant. And in the end, I didn't get the job. And the reason is because the CEO felt I was not assertive enough. He basically told me, Danny, when you had an opinion, I wanted to hear it. I don't want to hear maybe, if, that, and even if it's going to, disagree or with someone else, but I'm hiring you for your opinion and for your information. And therefore, that's what I want to hear. I don't want you to be apologetic. I don't want to be worried about stepping on people's toes. So in that case in particular, I felt I've been in scenarios and I've told the story where I've, called people out in a room when they're right in front of me and I didn't even realize. I feel like this is the opposite extreme where it's coming in and being a bulldozer and smashing everything down. I think in general, you kind of have to be somewhere in the middle,
Yeah.
but I think you need to be, but I feel like it's leaning towards the assertive.
I think it's reading the room a little bit. I think there's times where someone wants a peacekeeper, somewhere someone wants assertiveness. For me, it's hard to balance. I am naturally a peacekeeper. That is my personality. So being too assertive is just changing who I am, which fundamentally I don't want to have to change who I am just for someone to listen to me. If they're not going to listen to me, then that's their loss. But at the same time, we do have to adapt, to the situations you're in to a certain extent, but with still kind of keeping true to who you are. I think it's definitely, like you said, a balance of finding that middle ground.
And in situations like where I was, I think key is about communication, where who you're reporting to, find out what the style they want, right? Do you are you coming in to be careful, right? Or do they want you to come and just blow the place up? And that's it never hurts to ask. It never hurts to have that open communication. When you do, that's where success comes, When you don't, that's usually, it's like choosing the door right or left. Some of the times you'll be right, but some of the time, 50% of the time you won't be.
Yes.
So Maddie, have you had any instances where you counseled a newer employee or someone you mentored and they began to work with a specific client that you knew to exhibit ageist or sexist behavior, even if it was just in a vague? So how do you coach, or how did you coach that employee?
I'd say this is probably something I've dealt with more recently, with just doing more mentoring, managing and stuff. And so I don't know the best way necessarily, but I think, like we mentioned the tips before, trying to, one, just straight up tell them that, but two, I think leading by example is the best form for me. And a lot of times what the people I'm mentoring or new employees are doing is just shadowing. So if I'm telling them, be self-confident, and then I'm not self-confident in meetings, I think it can be confusing. So as much as I've tried to use those things before for myself, I think even now when I'm having people watching that are following what I'm doing, I've been much more aware of that, just to make sure that I'm setting a good example. But also I think just letting them know it's not personal. If it does happen to them, a lot of these clients where I'm I know they act like this, I can kind of tell where they're coming from. And I also know I'm not going to change them and their opinions. It's not like I can make them think something differently. So I just try to give them a heads up where I can and just let them know it's not on you. It's just, maybe they question everyone and we don't know if it's because I'm a woman. Maybe they just ask everyone like that. We don't know. But you can be prepared for it and go into that meeting knowing they're going to ask you more questions than normal or something like that.
So it makes me think of that. I remember certain times where, it's been a big presentation, clients aren't exactly happy, and you're really well prepared, but you've asked me, or maybe the client has asked me to be in the meeting as well. Mm-hmm. And for me, I always feel like it's a tightrope where it's I'm here for a reason. Sometimes I need to speak up. But on the other hand, I don't want to step on Maddie's toes. I really want Maddie to be the main speaker. And sometimes it's difficult. So if you were to give me advice, Like, or not just me, but any other boss who might have to come into a meeting with, their lead, like you, and like they have to be there, but also, be careful. So what advice would you give them for that meeting? Like, when is it appropriate for them to speak, or how would you coach them?
I do think it's good to let like me or the person lead, because otherwise I think it just solidifies that like you're more, something like that. But mostly like affirming the decisions or things like that, which you mostly do. Like you'll nod along, or you'll be like, I agree with this. Maybe add extra explanation if it's needed. Things like that, just to kind of like affirm that that's correct. But then also maybe even like an introduction to be like, hey, Maddie's going to lead. I trust her opinions wholeheartedly. We've discussed this. We're on the same page. Cool. Like kind of set the stage there, I think can help. And then just throughout, I feel like it definitely depends. There's been times where I was able to lead and you didn't have to jump in a ton. And then sometimes I feel like you kind of jumped in whenever they keep kind of asking the same question in a different way. And you can kind of tell like they're just either I'm not explaining it right or they need somebody else to explain it. And I think that's a good time to jump in when you can kind of see that like, we're hitting a wall. We're spending too much time on this topic. Like something's not right here. And again, I know I'm not always perfect in my explanation, but it can sometimes be both ways. I'm explaining it in a way that doesn't make sense to them. Maybe they're not as receptive. So you jumping in can kind of help dissolve the situation a bit and like make it a little bit better.
So if we use like the Batman Robin example, but so Maddie would be the Batman, Danny would be the Robin, and when he has to come in to help, he will. But he's definitely not the head honcho. It's not called the Robin Mobile; it's the Batmobile, and it's for a reason.
Exactly. Yep.
So I guess similar to that, what are your ways of fighting against being undercut as the expert in the room?
I mean, similar to some of the stuff we talked about before, like self-confidence and language. But I think, let's say you did all that, you prepped, and you get to a meeting and they're still kind of like not listening, whatever is going on. I think this is the part I struggle with the most. I so badly want to just be like, okay, cool, you can talk to Danny, like, and not fight it. But I think just it's important to assert your expertise again and kind of stand strong on your opinion, to at least try that and kind of not change your mind and be like, okay, we'll do what you want, and say, no, this is really what I think. This is what we should do. And if they still push, then in our case, most of the time, I'm not often in a call by myself. So I do appreciate that. And it's helpful to lean on, if it's an account manager that's taking notes, I can be like, okay, can you set up a call with Danny, or kind of pull them in to help diffuse the situation a bit. Because like I said, I'm not going to change someone's mind. So if they're really pushing that hard and they're still not agreeing, or they still want to talk to you, whatever it may be, I think being able to lean on your team and like have someone you trust can help get to the next step. And sometimes that's talking afterwards. And I think we've had times where they'll be like, can you get Danny's opinion? And I'm like, I did get Danny's opinion. And then they'll be like, can you get it again? And then me and the account manager will be like, okay, we'll just tell them the same thing that Danny, because you most of the time, like, what's going on. It is your opinion. They just don't really believe that. So we're just kind of like, yeah, we'll check with him. And then we just say the same thing. So it definitely helps to have a supportive team that can like check in afterwards and be like, all right, what are we doing? Are we all feeling good? Like that kind of stuff can help for sure.
So what sort of things do you wish others on your team or others who are more aware of this can do to help counter this culture in their own coworkers or clients?
I guess it's kind of similar to what you said about like you being in a meeting. But I guess even from like a coworker perspective, I do this sometimes. I kind of like noticed I was doing it, but I will like nod along in a meeting when like Brianna or someone is giving updates. I'll be like, yeah, I agree. Even if it's like paid search and I don't really know, I kind of just like want to give them credit and like boost them up and let them know, like let the client know that I agree with them. We're all on the same page. We are a team that's thinking the same way. Same with like giving credit where it's due. So like if you are the department head and someone else on the team really like did this, like for example, if I had someone that did the briefs, but I'm in the meeting presenting it to the client, kind of being like, this person made the briefs, they did a great job, or this person made the creative, they did a good job, can just, I think overall can help boost the team. But especially if it's a younger person on the team, a woman on the team, it really solidifies their position and like their expertise.
I love that. I love that group effort coming together and supporting everyone. I know that's something we do. That could be huge, right? You could have people in the meeting who have nothing to do with certain parts of the meeting, but just to be there and support and bring that person up, that can change how that person is viewed in the eyes of the client or, the person you're meeting with. That's great.
Totally. It can be simple things, like they did a great job or just simple things like that. And I think most of the time our team knows that because we say that all internally, but it's like saying that in front of the client specifically can really make a huge difference.
I remember times where I've said that on a call and we just got to do it more.
Yeah.
Right?
Do it more.
Shout the praises from the rooftops.
Exactly. Can't hurt.
Not just afterwards, but also even sending an email afterwards, like emailing the clients. Wow, wasn't that great? Look what Maddie did. That was awesome. So, I think that could be another opportunity as well.
I think our account managers are really good at that too. Just because their personality is very they're good at hyping people up. But they'll be like, here's the link to that great report. Like they're just very enthusiastic about everything. And I think it makes everyone feel so much better.
Picking back off of this, when companies are looking to hire, what do you think HR and recruiting team members can do to be aware of potential biases towards women, men? We could talk about certain ages or races, really falls any in that category. And specifically in your case, because you're coming from the perspective of a young woman, how can we mitigate the negative effects of those biases?
As important as it is to know what can I do, what can other young women do, what can coworkers do, I think at the end of the day, the people that are in charge of decisions are the ones that can actually make change. So I think that's an even more important discussion point because, the people hiring, or in this case, we can't really control what our clients say, but we can definitely be aware of it. So I think awareness is the most important part. And I think it's also important to remember it's not on the woman or the young person necessarily to make those changes. But being aware, I think, is a huge thing. And then I've noticed this whenever I have a very limited experience with interviews, but I've noticed it in myself. So I imagine on a wider scale, this would apply, where sometimes you just get a weird vibe from someone interviewing and you're like, I don't know if they're a great fit. I'm not sure, but maybe you don't know why that is. You're like, is it because of this thing? Maybe you can't pinpoint it. And I think really pushing yourself and questioning why you think that way or why you feel that way is important, because it might be an underlying bias that you don't know about, right? And it doesn't mean that it's wrong necessarily. It doesn't mean that they still aren't a great fit. But if you question it, you can kind of figure out a lot more rather than just being like, nah, not a great fit. Why are they not a great fit? Is it because I'm used to working with people that are more closer to my age, so them being younger, it makes me a little uncomfortable? Is it because I usually work with younger people and they're older, or, whatever the age, gender, race, whatever it is? I think really questioning yourself can make you be aware of that, and then you can decide next steps. Because sometimes they still may not be a good fit because of a couple different things, but maybe that first inkling that's making you uncomfortable is some kind of underlying bias that you have. And that's not bad inherently because we're all raised certain ways, but what you do with that is what I think can make a big difference and ultimately shows your own character and things like that. And also the other one that I always say is that experience does not necessarily equal skill, especially in this age of Gen Z and people getting into the workforce. Just because you have 5 years of experience doesn't mean that candidate is any better than someone with 1 year of experience. Obviously, it's a determining factor, but I don't think it should be the only thing, especially nowadays where we have online courses and so many opportunities to, apply our knowledge. I think experience maybe shouldn't have as much weight as it's had in the past. I think about my mom who just switched her career. She just switched to cytology. So when someone looks at her, they think, okay, 50-year-old woman, she has 30 years of experience in the workforce in general. Great. But she only has 1 year of experience in cytology. And those 30 years don't do anything to help her look at microscope slides versus someone who is, one of her coworkers that she tells me about is my age and has the same exact experience as her, but is a lot younger. And her coworker actually got paid less when she started. I can't prove it's because she was younger or anything, but it was an interesting kind of note to see that my mom was being treated a little bit differently because she does technically have 30 years of experience. But in this case, they're doing the exact same job. They have the exact same skill level. That's obviously a niche example, but it was very interesting to kind of see that applied in real life.
So speaking of hiring, When it comes to female mentors who've broken that glass ceiling and paved the path a bit on being a woman in the digital marketing space, is there anyone that you'd like to follow and let our listeners know about that they should follow?
I think the main one I follow is, I'm going to say her name wrong, Aleda Solis, because she's specifically in SEO, which is what I work in. So her technical tips are super great, but it's also just really cool to see, a woman that's speaking and doing like so many amazing things and just like very much the face of her business and things like that. So she's definitely one I follow. And then Anne Handley and Amy Vernon are both in more like social media. So not necessarily like the specific industry I'm in, but I think they're both just like great businesswomen and have a lot of like cool tips. And again, I think just representation is super cool to see and to watch them like girl bossing, as they say.
I love that term. Do you know where that comes from?
The internet. I don't know exactly where. Just an internet term.
And related to that, there's actually a whole group, I believe it's called Women in Tech SEO, that's also really popular. So I just wanted to make sure our listeners know about that as well. They really push, specifically in the technical SEO space. In SEO, there's a couple different parts, but they push women in that space and try to get more women speakers and conferences. So that's also an awesome group to take a look at. But definitely are a lot of talented women in the digital marketing space who I stay in touch with. A lot of our guests on the Digital Marketing Mentor have been some of those. We're very lucky that we do have those examples or shining lights
Definitely.
to look after. Well, Maddie, this has really been an awesome discussion, and hopefully it's going to be insightful and eye-opening for a lot of people who maybe don't even realize that they have these biases, and so that when they do get into those conversations, whether they're an agency, whether they're a client, whether hiring people, whether they're just talking to their coworkers, it can let them open their eyes up to see, this new vision of, do I have some biases when I'm speaking to people? Am I maybe not respecting them in the right way? Yeah, this has been a really, really awesome conversation.
Yeah, totally agree. Thank you for having me.
Before we close up, obviously, we need to do our lightning round. Maddie, I think you're a big book reader, so we would love to know, what are your top 3 books that you recommend for our audience?
Alrighty. So I like to read some like self-help psychology books from my psychology background. So Brene Brown is I don't know if you've heard of her, but she's very big in the kind of like psychology self-help space. And her book Daring Greatly is super great. It's just about like empowerment and like being vulnerable and courageous to like learn more about yourself and push your boundaries. So it's super great for personal life, but also can definitely apply to like business or anything like that. So that is a great one. And also, I'm going to say her name wrong, but Not Nice by Dr. Aziz Gazupra is about kind of what I mentioned about like Gen Z and like boundaries and that like people pleasing idea is definitely something I've like dealt with in my life. And it kind of addresses like just a whole different aspect of that and like terms of psychology and examples and things like that. So that's super, super insightful. And my last one is We Were Liars by E. Lockhart, which is like a young adult fiction book, but it's one of my favorites. So love that.
I'm glad you threw in some fiction because it's important to have some fun every once in a while as well.
Love a good fiction book.
So Maddie, where can our listeners learn more about you?
I'm on LinkedIn, Maddie Deane, and that's pretty much it.
That's perfect. And I'm sure, like we've had with previous guests, people who are going through the same situation or want to chat, definitely reach out to Maddie on LinkedIn. I'm sure she'd be happy to discuss.
I'd be happy to talk to anyone about being young or being a woman or both.
Well, Maddie, thank you so much for being a very special guest on the Digital Marketing Mentor. And thank you, listeners, for tuning into the Digital Marketing Mentor. We'll talk with you next time. Thank you for listening to the Digital Marketing Mentor podcast. Be sure to check us out online at thedmmentor.com and at the DM Mentor on Instagram. And don't forget to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts for more marketing mentor magic. See you next time.